Without further ado, I'm very conscious of time. It's an honor for me to introduce today's keynote from Kyra, Jennifer, and Fatima, Researching in Partnership, R is for Relationships. This keynote will be sharing the work of the Pedagogies for Social Justice project and how we can create ethical partnership relationships, as well as the ways in which we can dismantle coloniality in curricula, relationships, and research. As a woman of mixed Australian Indonesian heritage, this is something very personal to me, and I'm very keen to learn about how we can integrate a decolonial approach into our partnerships. I'll now hand it over to Kyra, Jennifer, and Fatima. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clem and Jenna. And thank you also for opening with an acknowledgement of country. We hope that acknowledging and honoring the land opens the way towards reconciliation and an end to colonial occupation everywhere. We also acknowledge that we're speaking to you today from the heart of British coloniality. And so we understand that our positions and relations within it are complex. We also wanted to say a huge thank you for this invitation. We were so delighted to receive it and to be able to be here in conversation with all of you. And as Clem has just said, the title of our talk is Research in Partnership, R is for Relationships. And what we'd like to do today is to talk to you a little bit about a partnership project that we've all been working on, which is called the Pedagogies for Social Justice project, and how that relates to research and how it is research. And we also hope that we can respond to the theme for the roundtable and discuss some of the paradoxes and challenges that emerge for us in doing this work together. I'm going to hand over to Kyra and to Fatima, and we'll each introduce ourselves. But we've structured this talk around a series of questions, and we hope that those will be generative for you as well, and they will give us all things to think about and speak together about.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Kyra. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm of African Asian descent. I completed my undergraduate in sociology at Westminster, and I'm now a master's student in international relations. I'm also a research assistant on the Pedagogies for Social Justice project. I'll pass over to Fatima.
Thank you, Kyra. Hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm Fatima. My pronouns are she, her. I'm Egyptian German. I studied, worked, and lived really between the two countries and moved to England in 2016. Currently, I'm a lecturer on the Student Partnership Program at Westminster, and I'm also a lecturer at Westminster Business School. And I'm very happy to be here today.
And for those of you that I haven't met before, I'm Jennifer. I use they, them pronouns. I have a joint appointment at the University of Westminster. I'm principal lecturer in the School of Social Sciences, and I teach mostly sociology. And I'm also University Director for Student Partnership in the Center for Education and Teaching Innovation. I was mostly brought up and educated as an immigrant white settler in the land we now call Canada, and I've been in the UK for the past 21 years. My work is centered around feminist and queer and decolonial pedagogies. It's really about the stories we tell and the relationships that we build.
So for us, the Pedagogies for Social Justice project is really dedicated to kind of understanding, addressing, and where we can mitigating the colonial legacies that may be present in teaching at our university, but also higher education as a whole. From the very beginning, the project has come together through students and staff working in partnership across the university. So we are a multidisciplinary group. In our project steering group and in the production of our tools, we've also recruited and connected with academics in other universities. So the project is really centered around creating spaces for conversation and relationships in multiple ways, but also challenging the kind of traditional ways that research is viewed. The tools that we have available to you at the moment are currently the discipline focused reading list and our podcasts, which are really special to us as they almost kind of, they're like a direct reflection of the transformative and kind of meaningful work that can come out of partnership. We're also working on a glossary type tool that aims to provide historical context, definitions, and kind of guidance on using certain terms related to race and coloniality. And this will be accessible on our website very soon. We hope that this keynote will kind of give you an insight into how our project has kind of like 3 interwoven processes. So decolonizing, partnership, and research, and how they're all kind of held together and understood through ethical relationships.
So we thought that we should start with that question: what do we mean by relationships? And for us, relationship is a broad concept and it's very contextual. So we mean all different kinds of relationships, to research, to knowledge, with people, with communities, with histories, with institutions, with power, to theories and practices, with land, to affect and to feelings and to emotions, and most importantly, to each other. As Yathna reminds us, research is not just about stuffing a jar full of knowledge for the sake of keeping it on a shelf in your basement. Research is about putting yourself and your relationships into your work because they are your work. So we've spent quite a bit of time thinking about, well, what are ethical relationships? And sort of in the various relationships that we have through the project and with each other, these are some of the answers that we've come up with. So they're about sharing responsibility and leadership. They're about building relationships of care and of sustenance. They're about committing to accountability and working toward transformation. They're about learning and unlearning as continual and circular processes. They're about being in conversation and walking our paths together. They're about creating integrity for the multiple selves that we each hold. They're very much about centering minoritized voices and knowledges, and about developing community.
One of the examples that kind of came to mind when we were thinking about these points was our Pedagogies for Social Justice podcast. And from being kind of in conversation with guests from different disciplines, locations, and at different points in their academic journeys, as a host, like I get the opportunity to really listen deeply and learn from their experiences and knowledges. And in a way, we almost kind of co-create knowledge as we work with our guests to kind of get a better understanding of how we might begin to colonize their discipline and pedagogy in the classroom. But drawing back to kind of Jennifer's points about relationships, the podcast really creates a space where we can make connections external to ourselves.
Thank you, Kyra and Jennifer. The example I would like to mention about relationships I experience is the steering group. So the group co-leads, co-manages, co-designs the Pedagogies for Social Justice project, and it's composed of a group of students and staff at the University of Westminster and beyond. And the reason I really appreciate the space of this group is that when we think of steering groups, often we would have this dry, formal image of something hierarchical where someone has authority and takes decisions. But this space couldn't be any different to such images and to usual academic spaces. So in the space of this group, we share very emotional and personal topics and parts of ourselves as we co-lead the project. And not only are these parts welcome, and they are also wholly carried by the group. And I found that the care and compassion of this group has brought a lot of healing with it. So yeah, that's why I wanted to share this one with you.
Thank you so much, Kyra and Fatima. Those are such wonderful examples of things that have come out of the project and have come out of those sorts of relationships that we've been building with each other and with other people. One of the questions that we really wanted to think through a little bit today and to pose to you all is this question of how do we research decolonially in partnership? And to answer that question, we have 2 more questions. So the first is to think about what is the context that we're working in. So context is really important in challenging the norms of research. And doing decolonial work in a settler colony and in the UK require quite different approaches, processes, and relationships. So in the first, in the settler colony, land is central to decolonizing. And in the second, in the UK, often it's more about repairing harm, about reckoning with the past and with coloniality in the present. Those are the sorts of things that are more at the forefront of our discussions. And so that doesn't mean that the other aspects aren't important in those contexts, but that each context has its own history, relationships, experiences of coloniality, and modes of decolonizing. And what's important is that those contexts then shape the knowledge that comes out of research. And if our partnerships are our research, then the context that they take place in is also central to how we go about building those relationships. So in understanding the specificity of where we are and who and what we are in relationship with, we think that's much more important than trying to replicate how projects are being done elsewhere. I'm going to hand over to Kyra, who's going to talk about our second question around that.
Thank you, Jennifer. So another question we think about when it comes to researching decolonially is, who are we in partnership with, and what does that mean for our relationships to each other and to research? And what we've come to realize is how decolonial partnerships offer the possibility of rehumanizing. Nelson Mandingo Torres and Deanne Bell both write about decoloniality and rehumanization, particularly how we need to bring our decolonizing selves to our research, because it's not just an intellectual practice. And the quote here, Maldonado Torres states, decoloniality refers to efforts at rehumanizing the world, to breaking hierarchies of difference that dehumanize subjects and communities and that destroy nature, and to the production of counter discourses, counter knowledges, counter creative acts, and counter practices that seek to dismantle coloniality and to open up multiple other forms of being in the world. Therefore, we attempt to rehumanize through our work by creating partnership relationships that are based on trust, love, and a shared desire to make positive change with and within our research. And in turn, this helps to kind of dismantle the conditions for hierarchical and extractive relations that have characterized the field of educational research for far too long. To give an example, the knowledges and labour of Black, Indigenous people of colour and other marginalised students and staff are often used in the name of decolonisation without consideration of the burdens that this work can potentially place on them. But what decolonial partnerships allow us to do is work with people rather than on behalf of them. And when we collaborate, the colonial power relations we've become conditioned to operate in are disrupted and transformed. But overall, we can use partnership to dismantle our inherited understandings of research and knowledge creation to shape new relationships to these things and to one another.
So when we speak of rehumanizing, a key question is really how to do so. And we believe that rehumanizing requires us to be intentional in developing our research partnerships. Being intentional means we need to be intentional about who we are in research partnerships with and whose research we support in order to set different scenes for research, which then can create space for different types of knowledge to emerge and to be centered. This then allows us to collaborate with other specifically decolonial researchers and to learn from decolonial texts and stories, which would then hopefully move us away from owning knowledge. So in that sense, partnership enables us really to collaborate with decolonial researchers and to honor the knowledge as produced in the global periphery. In doing so, as Tuck and Yang say, we can redirect to ideas which are often otherwise unacknowledged or unquestioned, and we can disrupt and reposition colonial knowledge that has come to dominate our thinking, pedagogies, and our research for far too long. So we would really like to offer you a question, one which we sadly cannot fully really answer ourselves, but it is one that Tuck and Yang pose and that we are continually wrestling with, and we think of it a lot, and this is why we would like to offer it to you. How do we learn from and respect the wisdom and desires in the stories that we overhear while refusing to betray them to the spectacle of the settler colonial gaze? Now, these are beliefs and values and feelings, emotions that guide us in our attempts to research decolonially in partnership. And a question that naturally poses itself is what kind of practices and methods are available to do work in this way. So that's why I would like to share a bit about two aspects of research, and so the processes of research and the methods of research, and how we try to live these beliefs in them. So when thinking of research processes, for example, writing, whether it's writing papers, grant applications, or even writing this keynote, our choices around methods or aspects such as joint authorship, citations, referencing, even other operational aspects such as setting meetings or distributing work amongst ourselves. All these processes are done through collective decision-making, sometimes in larger circles, sometimes smaller circles, but always through collaborative labor. And this means that there's no one single person who makes decisions or owns the knowledge that comes out of our work. So for us, these are ways in which we attempt to counter the coloniality and of the research environment that we are working in. As in terms for methods of research that are collaborative, we choose methods and practices that help us interrupt traditional power lines and that are fundamentally rehumanizing for each of us. Some examples of methods we choose are storytelling, collective autoethnography, participatory action research, and then we really go away and we co-design materials. We read and learn together, and we then co-deliver the research.
We now want to dedicate some time to discussing some of the challenges that accompany trying to kind of maintain decolonial partnerships. And some of these challenges we are still working through ourselves. To begin with these kinds of partnership relationships, you need to understand that they take time, and this is time which is often not recognized by institutions or runs counter to how research relationships are imagined and rewarded. Therefore, the tension here is between relationships that are rehumanizing versus relationships that are based on hierarchy and extraction. Another thing to consider is how this kind of work needs to make space for failure. And decolonizing, it's a long-term process that requires patience and the understanding that mistakes will likely occur. Therefore, it's important to make space for failure so that we can learn from it, as Bell, Kanam, Dutta, and Fernandez discuss. The tension here is between holding space for failure and maintaining a long view versus quick wins and measurable delivery that has roots in coloniality. And lastly, from me, the allyship we sometimes consider ourselves to be involved in is not always a given and is actually much more complex. We need to understand that our decolonial efforts and what we consider makes us allies is relative and determined by others and not ourselves. The groups that we work with decide if our work is meaningful and transformative for them. And decolonial partnerships require an ongoing reflexivity and should not have allyship as their end goal. So here the tension is between being answerable, accountable, and in relationship versus being invested in being seen as experts on others or self-identifying as an ally.
Thanks, Kyra. So one of the other kind of paradoxes or conundrums that we are always working through is a question that Sandy Grande poses. And she asks how we can be in the university, but not of the university. And we spend a lot of time thinking about this, especially because for us, decolonization in higher education means going against institutional expectations of research and of student-staff relations. And that really requires us to let go of our attachments to the university and our positions in it. And we recognize that that's difficult, especially for those of us who are historically marginalized in the university. So in higher education in the UK, and again, context is really important, the emphasis on measuring and assessing research impact comes out of coloniality and creates very real problems for how we do our work. So we're regularly negotiating the space that our project occupies so that it can be legible and understandable to the institution, but that its ethos and meaning exists outside of it, so that it's not of the institution. And we take a lot of comfort in knowing that this is a challenge that's been faced by many others and has been articulated by lots of people in different kinds of contexts. So Robin D.G. Kelley has written, "Universities will never be engines of social transformation. Such a task is ultimately the work of political education and activism. By definition, it takes place outside the university." And we also take some comfort from the incredible legacies of Black feminists such as Audre Lorde, and we ask continually, is it possible to do good decolonial work if we rely on the master's tools to dismantle the master's house? And we know that we've posed you lots of questions and probably not answered that many yet. But before we move into taking questions and having more of a discussion for you, we wanted to each take a moment and just reflect on what doing partnership and decolonizing and doing that through this project has meant for each of us. So I'm going to hand back over to Kyra.
Thank you, Jennifer. For me, doing this kind of work has not only kind of allowed me to make meaningful kind of connections with amazing people, but it's given me opportunities to lead and feel a part of something so much greater than myself, which I don't think you always get as a student in university. And I've been so lucky to kind of work with Jennifer and Fatima, who support me and make me feel empowered every day. And I feel so much more confident in not only the work that I do for the project, but also in my studies. So I'm super grateful for what decolonial partnerships have done for me.
Thank you, Kyra. So to me, really, this work has triggered a process of trying to become comfortable with the uncomfortable. Throughout my studies and my work, especially in Germany, as back then a veiled Muslim student, I often or regularly felt that I need to validate the space I take. And my coping mechanism was that I try to equip myself with knowledge. And starting this work on decolonial partnerships has shown me that the more I try to know, things like how do we decolonize? How does a decolonized curriculum or university look like? I have no answers. So the more I tried to know, the less I felt I did know. And this work is really about constantly questioning ourselves. So with time, I really learned to become very comfortable and confident in saying that I do not know answers, telling colleagues who want us to give them the answers of tell us what to do to decolonize. So being very confident in telling them, I do not have the answer and I'm not supposed to have it. It is a process. We need to go through it together and in partnership. And yeah, this process has been very valuable to me.
Thanks, Fatima. Thanks, Kyra. So for me, really, this has been a very generative space. Having space to be in decolonial partnership and to decolonize through partnership, I think brings about decolonial joy. And that's a rare thing for us. And it also brings with it the knowledge that while we're working towards things that will likely not materialize in our lifetimes, there's companionship and solidarity and friendship on that path. And it's a way of making real our shared dreams. So again, we wanted to say thank you so much for this opportunity to come and talk to you a little bit about this work that we've been doing. We're really excited to hear your questions and your thoughts and to engage in conversation with you. And then after that, we're going to all go to bed because it's quite late here. Thank you to all of you also who are here from the UK. It's been amazing to see that there are people from all over the place who've stayed up late or gotten up early to be here with us.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Kyra. Thank you, Fatima. There are sounds going on in the room that I'm in, and I'm making them, which is a kind of no and yes. those kinds of questions. And this is the conversation I've been waiting to have. And I think it's the conversation that many of us who've been coming to the roundtable for a long time have been agitating to have. So I'm really delighted that the three of you are here and pushing us to have it. I am actually going to take organisers' rights here and extend this conversation out to the break, because what I think the three of you have done here is to give us a lot of questions, a lot of concepts, a lot of ways of thinking about this that I think many people who are joining the webinar need some time to just think about a bit. So what I would like to do, if you're okay with that, is to just give our participants some time to try and frame a question in the chat, given the importance of that conversation. So we're going to hold on for a bit, if you like, and see what comes through. And if we get something through, then Samir and I here will kick us off. So let's just hang in there for a bit and we'll see if anything else comes through. All right. Pretend I'm singing something quietly. All right. So that's an invitation to our colleagues watching today to please post a question if you can. All right, my colleague Samir at my right here is champing at the bit to ask you something. So while those questions are coming in, I will ask Samir to kick us off.
Thanks, Ty, and thank you for that presentation. I've been rubbing my hands and just awaiting this presentation as well. My hands haven't singed yet but I think I want to ask this question that that I took away from this presentation. I don't remember who said this, but it's like who we are in partnership with. One of you said that, and Kyra, I caught your quote on time. You know, institutions are slow, etc. So my question is then, how do we bring people together to partner and work towards raising this issue? And I'm going to add another statement to that is, how do we motivate people, especially those who have lost faith in institutions, let alone they think they're slow to raise these issues, that partnership is the key to raise this issue? So how does partnership be this key in line with institutions being slow at raising these issues?
I think I'll answer the first part of your question. I feel like Jennifer or Fatima might be able to answer the second part a bit better than me. But you asked how do we bring people into partnerships? I think one of the things that I talk about regularly with Jennifer and Fatima is how I felt like I was able to come into this kind of space and come into this partnership because I felt like there was space for me to do that. And I felt like it was a safe space for me to do that too. So I think for students as well, I think just feeling like, you know, your lecturers kind of care about these kind of issues and that they're educated on these issues as well, like that all kind of adds to like creating this kind of safe space for students to enter and feel like, yeah, you know, like I want to work in partnership. I am open to having these relationships with my lecturers. So I think for me anyways, I can't speak for all students, but for me, that was a major kind of highlight for me.
Yeah, I think I share a similar viewpoint as well. I think, yeah, if lecturers are aware of these issues as well and they care about it, then I think we can foster a good relationship as well.
And I think the second part of your question was about institutions being slow and difficult sometimes.
Yeah, yes.
That's a very, very interesting question. So I think one key is really, one key sometimes is to remember to be kind, which sounds a bit weird. But I feel like in many conversations we've had where I've sensed a hesitation when it comes to partnership, when it comes to decolonization, I can sense sometimes there being an anxiety about doing things wrong, about not knowing how it's done. So I feel like the first step is sometimes trying to figure out why it's slow and what's behind it. And sometimes when it is this fear of this is a huge thing, we need modules and modules to do this, I feel like it's good to take a moment and remind people that this kind of change is actually slow, but we need to start with the small steps and to try break down the big dreams we have into small little things that to us can feel frustrating. But I think eventually that's how we can reach these bigger dreams. Maybe Jennifer, you want to add something?
Well, I think the two of you have already said really amazing things. But I noticed that there are lots of kind of questions about how do we do this? And I think often I'm under a lot of pressure to come up with a whole framework for the university. How are we going to scale this up? How are we going to make it work for everyone? How is everyone going to be involved? And I spent a lot of time saying, well, let's just back up. Not everybody wants to be involved. And we don't need big frameworks because, again, context is so important. So, thinking about, for the three of us, we come from quite different disciplinary backgrounds, and we have quite different visions for things. So we spend a lot of time each week just talking through those things. And then we also have those conversations with our steering group on a really regular basis. And I think that it is about committing to a slow, iterative process that takes different shapes and different turns and unexpected turns, but that we protect the core of it all the time so that it doesn't get pulled off into becoming a grand master narrative for the institution. Because the minute we do that, I think we break trust with the people that we most want to be working with. So I want to be in a university that is more socially just. I want to be in a university that doesn't look very much like the one I'm in now, insofar as it's university structure, not the people who are in it. And to do that, you have to build trust. You have to build trust with people from lots of different kinds of backgrounds who have very good and every reason not to trust the institution. So again, all of that is really slow, and it's dependent on taking it at that pace and not expecting everyone just to jump in.
Thank you, colleagues. There are some how questions in the chat, and I'm thinking here about the point Peter Feltman colleagues made on day one's keynote about our disposition to the how. And perhaps what we ought to be doing is asking the why, although I completely understand the how, the kind of rush to the how. So there is a how question here that I am going to put to you, because I think even just listening to you puzzle your way through that might be useful for colleagues who are listening in. You mentioned kind of a range of different kinds of research methods that are participatory or collaborative autoethnography. The question here from Sakina is about building those coalitions with others who are not already at that space. When you're working on this project, what are the kinds of conversations, resistances, points of connection that you have with colleagues who you are asking to join you? Yeah.
I wonder, Fatima and Kyra, if it might be helpful if you reflect on the workshop that you did recently in the business school, since it was all about decolonizing and partnership, and kind of surface some of those very questions. So maybe if you talk a little bit about that. I'm putting you on the spot here. I'm hoping that's okay. But it might give a concrete, tangible example.
Yeah, I think it's funny because that's exactly the example I thought of when hearing the question. Because business schools are, I think, sometimes more difficult maybe to approach in this sense. And so I think a part of trying to find this connection is to somehow put ourselves in the shoes of the others. So I am in the business school, and I can see things in the curriculum or things that we might want to change. But it's important to consider the context of others and where they might be with their reflections. And we have time and space to reflect on all of this work and to form our thoughts on daily basis when they don't. And so I think one thing that helped me was to try to understand if I was where I was before I joined the student partnership team, what would I be thinking when I'm listening to this kind of workshop, and then to somehow make it relatable. And I think it relates. Now I lost my point, but yeah, I think it's a lot about reflecting on the relationships we have in that workshop with the participants. And Kyra and I were both we were both very happy with the kind of reflections we received from people in the workshop. Yeah, but I'll hand over to Kyra if you want to say anything.
I didn't actually get Ty's question, but I'll talk about the workshop and hopefully it answers. But yeah, with the workshop, I think, especially going into the business school, like we did kind of have, you know, an idea that, you know, there might be some people that are going to be opposed to kind of what we're talking about. There are going to be people that don't necessarily understand like where we're coming from. And I think, you know, just looking back to our tools as well, like we have discipline specific reading lists because like this work looks and feels different across the different disciplines. So I think having that kind of understanding and almost, I guess it's kind of like not sympathy, but kind of like just having that kind of understanding that, you know, some of this work is going to be like really different for some people. And I think having those kind of relationships and being aware of that can really kind of help like moving forward. And I think, yeah, this work kind of looks and feels different everywhere. And, you know, it's about context as well. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sorry. Was someone
It's
talking?
okay. Sorry, Samir. I just was going to say that I think sort of one of the key things, like when we think about rehumanizing, is the recognition that living under coloniality is harmful for everyone. And so in trying to work that through, we sometimes are quite reactive. That doesn't mean that's okay. And depending on our subjectivities, we experience that and we're on the receiving end of that in very different ways. So I think it's also partly the responsibility of people like myself to be stepping up and having some of the more challenging conversations so that when other people go in and deliver a workshop or they give a talk, people are able to be present and to listen and to engage. But all of that is process and it takes time. And I know we keep going back to that. It takes time, it's process, it's relationship. And I think it's the thing that you do in the same way that every year, if you teach a first year undergraduate module, you have a similar set of conversations with students because they're coming into the institution for the first time. And so in the way that that's cyclical, some of these things are also cyclical. And I think we just have to commit to that and to doing that work as well, alongside the kind of things that look more like research. Sorry, Samir, I interrupted you.
Thanks, colleagues. I just wanted to remind everyone we're going to keep this conversation going until the break. I'm going to get out of the way so that we can keep having this conversation. All right. You want to pick up, Samir?
Sure. So I have a question then. Are you optimistic based on your work that partnership will achieve this idea of social justice as we continue this we can say slow movement of decolonization in higher education?
I think that generations before us have done this work and generations after us will do this work, and that we're part of that cycle of the work. But the more I do it, the more I have the opportunity to speak with amazing people and build relationships with people, and all over the world, I can see people doing this work. I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that things can change. And I think about the kinds of relationships that I get to have with my students now and the ones that I had with my lecturers when I was an undergraduate student. And I think things do shift and they do change, but it takes time. We always have to be looking to that horizon of possibility. But, you know, Jose Esteban Munoz, when he talks about queerness, he says that queerness is always just over that horizon of possibility, that we're always trying to move towards it. And I think social justice in education is a bit like that. We can make concrete, tangible change, but changing the whole picture, that's a lifelong ambition, and one that people will carry on after us.
There's some language that research lands us in: expansion, progress, those kinds of words that seem to be contrary to the kind of project that you're drawing our attention to here. To me, these seem the most obvious kind of paradox. You know, we're working in an institution that has speeded up time, but actually the thing that you're asking us to do here is to slow down. And Jennifer, you landed on the point here about actually perhaps the university is not the place that we think it is, that we are relying on to deliver this vision that you're talking about here. You talk about love and dehumanization. Those words, they're not the words that we use when we talk about research. We talk about evidence and persuasion. Talk to us a little bit about how your project has gotten you to that point of kind of reconceptualizing the kind of enterprise of research, if you like.
Fatima or Kyra, do you want to answer that question?
I think one thing that comes to my mind is this aspect of progress or projects having, or research having, a starting and an end point when you know it has achieved what it needs to achieve. I think the key, and we talked about this a few times, the key thing here is that we actually do not know what a decolonized university is, what a decolonized curriculum is, because colonialism has been around way before there were universities. So we do not really know what the big picture will be, but all we can do is work on the little pieces of the puzzle. And I think and that's exactly the problem, because we cannot tell that this is then decolonized, because we doubt it will be in our lifetimes, but also we don't know that. So it's difficult to measure something. We would need to know it goes from A to B. And in this kind of research, it just isn't there. So we find ourselves constantly reframing, talking again and again, changing where we're heading, finding new ideas, discarding others. So it's really a constant, like a cloud that's constantly changing, really.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that as well. I think progress is also like relative. Like, I feel like for me, I feel like we make progress in our project, like when I've completed a podcast episode, or when I've had like a good meeting in the steering group. And I think linking back to kind of the question of optimism as well, like I think optimism is one of the things that kind of keeps me going as well in this kind of work. And I think you need to have that kind of optimism in any kind of like social justice work that you do. So I think Yeah, it just depends on how you view progress. And I do see the work that we do as moving towards kind of the bigger picture. So, yeah.
I think it's so hard, isn't it? Because we are so rooted in that kind of positivist language of order, progress, history is a linear narrative, and that all research we do must have impact. It must be measurable and quantifiable, and it must have some sort of factor. And I never even know what the factor is called, but it needs to have all of those things. And I think one of the kind of principles that we've really committed to is that when one of us is uplifted in that system, we all are uplifted in it together. So we don't take individual award or reward for the project. So that's something like we've committed to doing. And it is part of that process that we talked about letting go of our attachments to the institution. And that's really hard, because we all have material realities that we live in. And we've all been brought up in this way of thinking. And so sometimes we don't do it perfectly. We are very imperfect. But we have that space that we spent that time and that investment in building together, that we can then kind of hold each other to account and clap each other on and kind of build that together. And I always think it's a bit sticky, right? Like more people want to get involved and it kind of grows because I think it speaks to where people are at in universities often. It is very dehumanizing for staff and for students. And so thinking about, well, how do we re-articulate those things in different ways? How do we think about what success is for us? And is success a word we want? What would another word be? And yeah, Kelly has just said, and to share the exhaustion of it. Yeah. I think, and Fatima alluded to that in the steering group about how that it's a completely different space.
Yeah. I feel really challenged by your invitation to kind of disattach from the university, if that's even the right word, because many of us spend so much time trying to get into the place. And the invitation that you're asking us to think about is how we hold that invitation loosely, I think. I'm thinking about not just undergraduate curriculum, I'm also thinking about what we do in PhD programs here that really centre the kind of concepts that you're talking about. And we haven't really talked about that very much at all, because when we talk about curriculum, we're often talking about the undergraduate space rather than what happens in the space of education that actually trains us to kind of be in the academy. So that's a good and really interesting challenge for us to think about. All right, I'm really aware that it's very late for you all and you've hung in there beyond the time that we've suggested. So I want to now give you a chance to head off and get some sleep. You can see in the chat here that lots of us want to have this conversation again and again and again, and it sounds like, we have to. This is part of the work that you're pointing us to. So I'm going to ask my colleagues who are watching to extend their appreciation in the chat or whatever way they can. So please imagine applause at our end. And I want to thank you once again for kind of your time and hanging in there and giving us this kind of agenda, I think, to work with. So thank you, colleagues. Please go and get some sleep, and we will go to a break, and at 10:15 our time, we will move into the case studies and the research clinic. So you've got an extra couple of minutes to hang out with each other. We'll see you at 10:30. Talk to you soon.